Hi, class. I hope you're having a good day today. I am here to talk with you about Michael Lassell's poem from 1985, How to Watch Your Brother Die. I chose this poem for a couple reasons. One, it's unique in the sense that this poem is written in the imperative tone, which basically means commands, right? The poet, the writer, is telling us how to do something. And I also chose this poem because it's about a family that is affected by homophobia and also by AIDS. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say a little bit about the writer, and then I'm going to read the poem and talk about its meaning. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen so I can pull up that presentation. Okay, so here we go. Michael Lassell. Okay, so you should be able to see him on the screen. So he was born in 1947. That would mean that he's currently in his 70s. And you can see he is a poet, short story writer, essayist, editor, and also a theater critic. So he is from New York. He was born and raised in New York, currently lives there. And he got two MFA degrees. So again, the MFA degree is Master in Fine Arts. So he got his first MFA degree from Cal Arts in 1973. And then he got his second MFA degree from the Yale School of Drama in 1976. So for the last couple of years, actually, what he has primarily been doing, right, in addition to his writing, is he works on Broadway. So he works behind the scenes on a lot of Broadway shows, primarily actually Disney productions. So he worked with The Lion King, Aladdin, Tarzan, and The Little Mermaid when they were on Broadway. So I just pulled up some of his collections of poems and stories, right? So you can probably tell just from looking at these pictures, right, that Michael Lassell is primarily writes about gay people, and he is a gay man, right? So his poems here, you can see poems for lost and unlost boys, Two Hearts Desire, The Hard Way, Men Seeking Men, and Decade Dance. And the last one, Decade Dance, won the Lambda Literary Award for Poetry in 1993. Okay, so primarily his focus is love, right? Writing about love, both physical love and emotional love. And then he also focuses a lot on homophobia, right? And how that affects people and how that affects families. Okay, so we're talking about his 1985 poem, How to Watch Your Brother Die. Okay, so I'm going to pull it up on the screen in a minute, but I'm going to do something a little bit different than what I typically do. Typically, I read the poem and then I talk about it. But because this poem is a little bit longer than any of the other poems we've read so far for our class, I'm actually going to just read stanza by stanza, and I'll sort of pause after each stanza and talk about what is important, right? What we get out of the stanza. Okay, so let me go ahead and go back to my screen sharing, pull that up. Come on, Canva. Won't let me. Okay, sorry about that. Hold on one second. Okay, here we go. So here's the poem up here on the screen. Okay, so let me go ahead and start. So you can see, right, he dedicated the poem to Carl Morse, right? It's called How to Watch Your Brother Die. When the call comes, be calm. Say to your wife, my brother is dying. I have to fly to California. Try not to be too shocked that he already looks like a cadaver. Say to the young man sitting by your brother's side, I'm his brother. Try not to be too shocked when the young man says, I'm his lover. Thanks for coming. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to pause after each stanza. Okay, so I feel like this first stanza is extremely important because it gives us some context. Okay, so again, you see what I mean about how it's commands, right? It's written in the imperative tone. So we see, right, he's telling us how to act. When the call comes, be calm. Okay, say to your wife, right? So he's telling us what to do. Okay, so we see the context here, right? That his brother is dying and he has to go be there with him, right? And then, of course, then the next line, he's already there, right? And we see that the brother, right, that he's pretty far along, right, and that he already looks like a cadaver. And what is a cadaver? If you're not familiar with that word, it means a dead body, actually. So he already looks dead, and that there's a young man sitting next to the brother's side. So, right, they've never met before. That's interesting, right? And that the young man introduces himself. I'm his lover. Okay, so right off the bat, like my first thought is, okay, that word lover, right? That's pretty interesting choice of words, right? He doesn't introduce himself. I'm the boyfriend. I'm the partner, right? I'm the friend. I'm the significant other, right? I'm the lover, right? His lover, right? That word lover implies, at least I think it implies a sexual relationship, right? And also it underscores the word love. Okay, so that's very interesting. Okay, now let's continue. Listen to the doctor with a steel face on. Sign the necessary forms. Tell the doctor you will take care of everything. Wonder why doctors are so remote. Okay, so from this stanza, we get, right, the important detail that here, this brother, right, the narrator, I'm going to call him because we don't have a name for him, that he's basically the next of kin. So even though the lover is sitting there by the bedside, right, it is this brother that is needed to take care of the paperwork, right, these legal documents that need to be signed. Okay, so it's not the lover, right, it's the brother that's doing that. Watch the lover's eyes as they stare into your brother's eyes, as they stare into space. Wonder what they see there. Remember the time he was jealous and opened your eyebrow with a sharp stick. Forgive him out loud, even if he can't understand you. Realize the scar will be all that's left of him. Okay, so I feel like this stanza is significant because it introduces this image of the scar, right? That the narrator has a scar on his face, right? That was caused, when they were children, that there was some kind of like a fight between them. Okay, and it introduces for the first time this idea of forgiveness, right? Because it says that the narrator forgives the brother out loud. Okay, so he forgives him. Over coffee in the hospital cafeteria, say to the lover, "You're an extremely good-looking young man." Hear him say, "I never thought I was good enough looking to deserve your brother." Watch the tears well up in his eyes. Say, "I'm sorry. I don't know what it means to be the lover of another man." Hear him say, "It's just like a wife, only the commitment is deeper because the odds against you are so much greater." Say nothing, but take his hand like a brother's. Okay, now I feel like these two stanzas give us some insight about the narrator and the way we see that he's opening up to the lover, right? When they're talking in the cafeteria, he compliments him, like compliments how good looking he is, right? And then when the lover starts to get emotional, he takes his hand, right? So he's kind of like reaching out to this lover and showing empathy towards him. Right now, empathy is going to be one of the most important themes of this poem. So maybe let's just pause and say a little bit about that, right? What is empathy? I think it's a word that we use a lot, but maybe we never really think about what it actually means, right? What does it mean to have empathy? Well, empathy is the capacity for us to try to understand emotions as they're felt by another person. So you've probably heard the saying, right? Imagine what it would be like to walk a mile in my shoes, right? Well, that's kind of referring to the idea of empathy, right? Imagine what it would be like to be me, to be in my position, to experience the world as I do. And so we see, right, that the brother, is beginning to open up, right? He's thinking about the lover and how the lover feels. Okay. Right. And also in that last stanza, right, we see this mention of marriage, in relationships. And so basically the lover is saying that being with a man is basically a little bit more serious, or maybe not serious is the right word, but a little bit more difficult, a little bit more deeper, right? Because he says the odds against you are so much greater. Okay, so the commitment between the two of them is deeper. Okay. Continuing on. Drive to Mexico for unproven drugs that might help him live longer. Explain what they are to the border guard. Fill with rage when he informs you you can't bring those across. Begin to grow loud. Feel the lover's hand on your arm restraining you. See in the guard's eye how much a man can hate another man. Say to the lover, how can you stand it? Hear him say, you get used to it. Think of one of your children getting used to another man's hatred. Okay, so in this stanza, we see that the narrator, for the first time, it seems, is experiencing, possibly homophobia, right? Because if he explained to the border guard, right, that these are drugs that are meant to help somebody who is suffering from AIDS, right? And I haven't used that word yet, but we come to see that that's what the lover, I'm sorry, not the lover, that's what the brother is dying of, AIDS, okay? So we can guess that possibly the brother, the narrator, right, said to the border guard that that's what these drugs are, and that he was informed that he can't bring them across. And it says that he's starting to, imagine what it would be like to feel that kind of discrimination, right? To have that kind of judgment imposed on him, and that the narrator gets mad, right? He's filled with rage. Okay. And when he asks the lover, how can you stand it? Right, the lover says, oh, you get used to it. Okay. And that's very upsetting, right? Because then he's like, he starts to think about his children, right? Children who are innocent, right? That, he starts to think about what it would be like for one of his children to have to experience another man's hatred. So he's starting to learn about the reality of what it's like to be a gay man, and the kind of like rage that he feels, right, at that kind of homophobia. Okay. Call your wife on the telephone. Tell her he hasn't much time. I'll be home soon. Before you hang up, say, how could anyone's commitment be deeper than a husband and wife? Hear her say, please, I don't want to know the details. Okay. Now this stanza I feel is very important because it's really the only insight that we get into the narrator's life at home, right? His wife. This is a phone conversation between him and his wife. And, in my opinion, this wife seems very cold, right? So her response is, please, I don't want to know the details. And, I kind of find myself wondering why the wife isn't there with her husband, right? His brother is dying. That is a very important traumatic life experience, and that he's there alone, dealing with this by himself is a little bit strange, I think, right? You would think that the wife would come with him. Okay. Maybe she had to stay home and care for the children. We're not exactly sure, but just when the husband is reaching out on the phone to his wife, you kind of get the sense that he wants to talk about what he's going through, that her response is just to kind of cut him off. Please, I don't want to know the details. And so, why did Michael Lassell include that? I'm not really sure, but it does create a contrast, right? We see a contrast between the dying man and his lover. And then this brother who's come across the country to be there at the bedside of his dying brother, and that the wife, that she stayed at home. So it almost seems as though the marriage between the narrator and his wife is, not maybe as tight a relationship as the relationship between the lover and the brother. That's just the way I read that. Okay, moving on. When he slips into an irrevocable coma, hold his lover in your arms while he sobs, no longer strong. Wonder how much longer you will be able to be strong. Feel how it feels to hold a man in your arms, whose arms are used to holding men. Offer God anything to bring your brother back. Know you have nothing God could possibly want. Curse God, but do not abandon him. And again, we see this empathy, right? That the narrator is holding the hand, right, of the lover, right, is actually like holding him in his arms, and stare at the face of the funeral director when he tells you he will not embalm the body for fear of contamination. Let him see in your eyes how much a man can hate another man. Okay, so I feel like this really gives us some insight that this is, in fact, about a man dying of AIDS, right? So again, the poem was published in 1985. In 1985, the AIDS epidemic was new, and a lot of people didn't really understand how it was spread, right? There was a lot of fear that it was spread through like germs, fear that it was spread through touching, and so we see in the stanza, right, this funeral director, right, won't embalm the body for fear of contamination. And now we see the narrator is feeling hate, right? He like rage that he won't do that. Stand beside a casket covered in flowers, white flowers. Say, thank you for coming to each of the several hundred men who file past in tears, some of them holding hands. Know that your brother's life was not what you imagined. Over here, two mourners say, I wonder who'll be next. And I don't care anymore as long as it isn't you. Okay, so in this stanza, we get some insight about, right, the AIDS epidemic, right? That this idea that there's so many people who are being affected by this, that the people coming to the funeral are wondering, who's going to be next, this unknown. And then also, I feel like it's very significant that, it's pointed out several hundred men have come to the funeral. Right. Wow. I don't think I've ever been to a funeral that had that many people. That's a lot of people. And, I feel like there's some significance, right? What does that suggest? It suggests that the brother who just passed away was very loved. He was very important in the community, right? That many people came to the funeral, right? Why do we go to funerals, right? We go to funerals to pay our respect, right, to honor, right, the person who's just died, right, to honor their dignity and to just show that we care. Now in literature, this is a theme that comes up, and I'm sure many of you probably are familiar with The Great Gatsby, right, F. Scott Fitzgerald's novel from the 1920s, right? And if you remember that novel, you remember that, right, when Gatsby had his parties, hundreds of people came, but yet when he died, right, only, I believe, like 3 people came to his funeral, right? His father and then the owl eye man that was living there with him. Okay, so nobody came to the funeral to pay respect. Same thing in the very famous play by Arthur Miller that we'll be reading later this semester, Death of a Salesman. Maybe I shouldn't spoil it, right? I'll save that for later, right? But just think about that all these men, Michael Lassell points out, comes to the funeral. Okay, moving on, 2 more stanzas. Arrange to take an early flight home. His lover will drive you to the airport. When your flight is announced, say awkwardly, if I can do anything, please let me know. Do not flinch when he says, forgive yourself for not wanting to know him after he told you. He did. Stop and let it soak in. Say, he forgave me, or he knew himself. Both, the lover will say, not knowing what else to do. Hold him like a brother while he kisses you on the cheek. Think that you haven't been kissed by a man since your father died. Think, this is no moment not to be strong. Fly first class and drink scotch. Stroke your split eyebrow with a finger and think of your brother alive. Smile at the memory and think how your children will feel in your arms, warm and friendly and without challenge. Okay, so I feel like in that second to the last stanza, very important dialogue between the lover and the brother, right? So the lover tells him to forgive himself for not wanting to know him after he told you. Now that gives us a lot of insight, right? Because we didn't know up until this point that the two brothers had been estranged, right? That it's implied that when the man who just died, the brother who just died, that when he came out, right, when he probably disclosed that he was gay, that the narrator, right, basically it seems disowned him, that they were no longer close to each other, right? It says not wanting to know him after he told you, right? That it suggests that they had been estranged. Okay, so that's important detail. Okay, and then this idea again of forgiveness, right? The lover is doing something very important here. He's allowing the brother to have closure, right? Because remember, when the brother arrived at the hospital, right, the other brother was already looking like a cadaver. He could not talk, they could not communicate. So the brother who was dying couldn't say, I forgive you. I forgive you for not, knowing me ever since I came out as a gay person. So the lover does that for him, right? He tells the brother, forgive yourself. Okay. So what a wonderful gesture on his part to do that. Because, I think we all probably know that if somebody dies and there's a rift between you and the person who dies, once the person's gone, that's it, right? There's no opportunity for you to close that rift, right? To make things right between you. And that can be very upsetting, right? You don't want to have like that. You don't want to end a relationship without the opportunity to make amends. And so in a sense, the lover enables that to happen. And then also, right, it says here, hold him like a brother while he kisses you on the cheek. So it's almost like now these two men are brothers, right? It's kind of like he's the brother-in-law, even though these two men weren't legally married. Okay. And then the last stanza, right? He's returning home. I noticed he's flying first class, suggests he has money, which makes me think, God, how horrible. He could have been flying back and forth to visit his brother all the time. And then, of course, when he's thinking about his brother, right, touching the scar on his eyebrow, now he's smiling, right? He's smiling at the memory. Okay, and then he's also thinking about his children, right? Returning home to his children, right? Who symbolize innocence. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and stop sharing the screen. Okay, so what is this poem all about? What can we take from this poem? What are the themes here? Well, I feel like this poem is another example of a dynamic character. So the narrator, right? He, at the beginning of the poem, he's kind of like this homophobic man who's been estranged from his brother for a long time. He's made this journey, right, to take care of the paperwork, to see his brother for one last time. But we come to see that he goes on this emotional journey, right? He is a dynamic character because he changes, right? By the end of the poem, he's, hugging the lover. He's learned a lot about how it feels to experience hate, right? Another man's hate, right? He gets some insight into what it is like to live as a gay man. Okay, so I feel like this poem creates a lot of empathy for, right, families that are affected by homophobia, right? It also creates a lot of empathy for victims of AIDS. And even though it's a very sad poem because the brother dies, right, at least we see the narrator, right, taking a journey that results in him growing as a person, right, becoming more full of empathy. Okay, so we hope that that will influence, right, the rest of his life. All right, well, that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed the poem, and I look forward to reading your thoughts on the discussion board, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.